All right, so we're going to talk about a Hieroglyphics debut album. I will be completely honest. I didn't know this was the debut album for them. I'm
Oh, okay, you did.
aware of it because I had a friend that said he's really into Dell, right? He's into a lot of different music, but like hip hop, he's into Dell. He's into Handsome Boy Modeling School and stuff like that. So I was kind of biased against it for some reason. I always saw it and it was like, I didn't know it was 98. I would have guessed it was like 2000 or something like that.
Yeah.
But just a little
I think
background on it, right? So it's their debut. It appears to be self-released or independent release because it was released on Hieroglyphics Imperium Records.
Yeah.
And to this date, it's sold over 100,000 copies. And it's really highly regarded critically. So you've got AllMusic gave it 4 stars. Rap Reviews gave it 9 out of 10, which is pretty incredible. A couple other things is it's kind of a long album, a debut or not, right? It runs at, what was it, one?
Yeah, it's like 20 something, right?
Yeah, there's 22 tracks on it. Now, of course, some of those are
got half
minute and a half long tracks, like one verse. There might be a couple intro skits, stuff like that. The other thing about them is Hieroglyphics is this huge collective, right? So
Yep.
you've got Del the Funky Homo Sapien, Casual, Pep Love, who's pretty popular. I remember people talking about him a lot. Domino, who's a producer. I think it's DJ Torre. I assume that's how it's pronounced. And then all 4 members of Souls of Mischief. So Festo, A+, Opio, and Tajay, or Tajai. I'm not really sure how you pronounce that.
Tajay. It's Tajay.
Okay. So there were 3 singles that were released, right? So you got The Who. That was the first one that actually came out before obviously the album a year before. To some extent, it might have been just a few months. I'm not sure. 1997. They followed that up with the last one, and then You Never Know. We could start with what we think are the strongest tracks. So we could start with initial impression. What do you want to do, Dave?
We can go strongest tracks. Yeah, I'm kind of similar in the when this dropped, I didn't hear it like the way I needed to, I think. Like I knew people who had it, and I was on to like Souls of Mischief and Dell at that time, but just didn't hit me with Hieroglyphics until after Deltron 3030, and maybe even I got into Full Circle before I really dove into this album.
Yeah, I mean,
So, I don't know, things like stick with you, and you always go back to it. Like this is one album that, since I didn't catch it in the moment, I feel like I probably don't go back to it as often as I should.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and for me,
I
the
do.
problem with me was I was probably still in 1998. I would have still been listening to. I guess it was closer to independent hip hop, but it was still like people that were on Priority Records and like these smaller but like traditional hip hop labels. I'm trying to think of a few others, but like MOP and Organized.
Right. Yeah, same here. That's what
Right. So like
Mobb Deep.
that were like, that had come out like early 90s and were on some sort of major label, but now it's, the whole scene is changing. So this is a little before my time in terms of, reading like Elemental Magazine and finding out about like Self Scientific and Marzil and Black Alicious and all these other groups. And, like what I would refer to as like the indie revival era where smaller labels are trying to keep what was then hip hop alive at the time. So that's probably part of my biased against it, or just like my unfamiliarity with it.
Yeah, right.
What do you think, Chad?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Blacklisted, I should say.
I kind of I got to hear that pretty close to when it came out, actually through MoMA. He kind of introduced me to it, and I kind of really just took to the album immediately. I think it's one of the things that really made me want to get more into like DJing hip hop and stuff, and because I was really into electronic and stuff at the time too. I kind of had that both sides of my personality, and that's kind of one of the ones that really, I think, held me like my feet in hip hop because I'd always been into it, but like, you have your different interests at different areas of your life and stuff like that. But when like, and obviously there was a lot of like crap coming out in that era as far as like mainstream. So I remember the first time I heard that album, it was like extremely refreshing. So I actually get a lot of nostalgia when I do listen to it. It kind of like takes me back to like late '90s, early aughts. Some of my first like living on my own and stuff like that too. So and it's funny too because even I never really got into the singles. I just got through the album in its entirety. So like I think my perception of the album is a little different too. Like I don't my favorite songs on that like actually the ones that were released as singles. Like I'd say like my favorite ones are Oakland Blackouts. I love the Oakland Blackouts. Like the way that beat drops, it just feels like I don't know, epic or dramatic. I don't know. It's got that like string sound in the background. And then I also really like After Dark because it just has like that kind of intensity.
Yeah.
Almost like
Yeah,
a
same
tension
here.
to it. So I really like that track as well. So those are like my two favorite tracks on it. Because like, that you have everybody's like, so the one thing I don't know if you guys realize too is you have each member of Hyro has like their own little track about themselves as well.
Right.
So I think that's why kind of you have a little bit of a longer album. Um, which those a lot of them are really good too. But yeah, like just in its entirety, like I just that it hooked me kind of when it heard me, and I actually had listened to this before I heard like Deltron or just Del on his own. So I kind of like heard the whole crew. Obviously I heard like Souls of Mischief, like 93 to Infinity and stuff like that. But yeah, that's my major my overall vibe of the album.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess
Yep.
we could mention that too. You mentioned some of your favorite tracks. I would say I liked All Things. I liked At the Helm. Even though I'm not crazy about Dell, and we can kind of talk about that. I liked Sea Delight. That track kind of reminded me of an Ugly Duckling track. Or I guess you could kind of say Ugly Duckling reminds me of what they did on that. I thought Off the Record was great. That kind of reminded me like jazz fusion. So that was refreshing because there are some beats on there. Some tracks are a little. I don't know that they aged the best. They didn't age that well, and even in like '98, it would have been like kind of a typical beat. So I'm not crazy about all of them. In fact, it was one of the singles. The last one. Yeah, I wasn't crazy about the production on the last one. No Nuts, that was fire. And then, as you said, After Dark was probably one of my favorite tracks on there. Weakest track. What do you guys think is the weakest track? Or what are your least favorite moments, we could say?
Oh man, I didn't even think about that. Um,
We'll put it this way. If Reviews gives it 9 out of 10, and All Music gives it 4, which I think is, actually, I don't know. Is that 4 out of, yeah, 4 out of 5. Why? What is it about the album that they think?
I think at the time the time it dropped, it was probably I'd say that was the beginning of a new shift in hip hop at the time, I guess, like the independent thing starting to pop and the split of like what mainstream was, what underground hip hop is. Like I feel like '98's maybe around that time where
Bling Bling.
like Wu Tang, Mobb Deep, like all that shit was on TV like nonstop. But then like something else started happening. It got some MTV shine, but then it led into like the super independent shit that happened like early 2000s, late 90s, like 99, 2000. But I think like this, the Black Star album, like I don't know, I just think like it was like the next maybe revolutionary moment in hip hop, kind of like 93, 94 was.
Yeah.
Maybe not, I don't know.
I think that era too, the one thing that was kind of coming out in that era too is you got to figure that's when like you really kind of had like Puff Daddy, that stuff was really, really big, and you had like that kind of that overproduced, kind of like the shiny suits floating through space videos and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the Southern movement and
yeah, that's kind of the other thing. I mean, you had probably would have been right around when Master P was out and stuff too. So it was just kind of like, it was just really kind of like and I never really, I mean, I'd say like that's why this album kind of pulled me back into it. Kind of the same thing with the Black Star album as well, because it was just kind of something like my introduction to hip hop. Like I listened to like Run DMC and stuff on the radio when I was a little kid, and I got into some of the popular stuff too. I really liked MC Hammer when I was like like 10.
yeah, it was like my first favorite rapper probably.
Yeah, so I mean, I had like different things, but like Beastie Boys and stuff like that. And then even in the early '90s, you had like Wu-Tang first coming out.
Right.
But then like you started getting into that middle night, and you had like Raucous. That was another push in that era that was really.
Yep.
But I think anything you were hearing on the radio, you were hearing like these like overproduced. I think it's right around when you would have like the big Will Smith tracks and stuff and all that. So you kind of had that like ultra commercial stuff. Really kind of, I feel like there was a really big divergence.
Right.
So I think this kind of was like a very cool, taking it back to its source, roots kind of album.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and even if it was going back to the roots, it was still like a breath of fresh air as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it was built on that foundation.
Yeah, like my favorite thing with Hyro was like, I love Tajay, Pep Love, like their flows, their styles, like even some of the weaker tracks here, I didn't pick out like my weakest one, but like I just appreciate that about those guys. Like I could listen to like those guys spit. Like doesn't matter what they're saying half the time. I just appreciate like the way they just let it go.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's probably a universal idea that was a transitional phase. I mean, that was like the point at which groups and acts that were foundational to like golden era hip hop, like if you were going to continue on some major label, you had to like get with the times. So as you were saying, like Ruckus and obviously independent labels like this Imperium, where Hieroglyphics is putting their stuff out, they, it's like they're a countervailing force right there. If you're going to make like traditional hip hop sample based with actual conscious content or just creative wordplay versus the bling bling and Puff Daddy and Master P, etc. That was like you had to join forces. It was a completely countervailing time. Those are like the end of careers in some cases. Without naming names, that was like, that's the same period at which like Stretch and Bobbito, if you look into their history, they were not, at least one half of them was not happy with the direction of hip hop at the time. It was just completely different. So, and I think that's even spoken about, like in one of my favorite tracks was that one with Dell. And he's even, the whole track is about that. His whole content is about how this is not, I don't want to use the language he uses in it. You can go speak, hear it for yourself, but he's completely criticizing what people's view of hip hop is at the time. So, yeah, to that, I think it's an important record for sure.
Right.
I think kind of in a weird way too. It's all the warnings were correct from that era as well. Like it did just kind of. I mean, if you think about it, it was kind of like a battle going on, and I mean, the underground still exists. I mean, but you know what I mean. Like if you look at what's popular in top 40, most of it now, you know what I mean.
Right.
It's mumble rap or this or that. So
yeah, it was really
and,
like pre-internet underground still existing a little bit. Like it was like not really. It was the internet, but not like what it became early 2000s with how you could absorb music.
Do you guys know if there were any videos? Did they put videos out, Blacklisted?
I honestly don't know. Probably. I mean,
I thought they did.
But they probably did. I would imagine. I don't think it would have got any airplay, and obviously That's the one thing that's kind of funny about that era too, is because like, you know, we didn't have YouTube or anything to just jump on and see like, oh, this stuff, because then people would make videos, but they would literally never come out. Yeah, there are videos for it.
Right.
So
that kind of
I mean, I
reminds
have
me
to
of
check this up.
like Black Moon around this time. I remember Buckshot, at least Buckshot, was interviewed by Big Tigga on Rap City, and they had videos. It was the same album that has like Busta Rhymes on it, on the hook, on one of it. The Onslaught, I think, was the track, but they had a couple of videos, and they showed them, and I'm like, I never have seen these any other time, you know. So that there was like these low budget videos, and it was like, this isn't getting on MTV. It's definitely not making it on VH. Why can't I? What is the other one? The one that never played hip hop.
VH1.
VH1. Thank you. Jeez, man, I'm getting old.
That was like the Boomer Network back then. Anyway, I think they started refining it, and they had everything, but that was kind of what that was. You had MTV, which I felt like was like marked to the kids. The one thing about that though is you would see these kind of videos though, like sometimes if you were like watching MTV at like 3 o'clock in the morning, on like a Tuesday night, you know, sometimes some of that kind of stuff would come on. Like that was the only time. MTV, I literally remember times when I would.
What was that show? And this is
Yo MTV Raps.
Yo MTV Raps.
That's like after, right? This 98. I'm trying to think when MTV Raps.
I think it was gone by then.
Yeah,
or at least in its
MTV
whatever.
Had a show
its
in the
real
early
form.
2000s called was it Subterranean?
Yeah, something like that. I forgot about that.
You could see like Def Jux videos, and I don't
That's
know if
right.
it was necessarily all hip hop. It might have been like an indie music.
Probably, and probably a wider range. Was it on like M2 or MTVU too? Because that's kind of too right when like you had MTV fracturing into like several smaller little bits and networks and stuff.
Right.
Because you originally had like just the initial one, but yeah, like you could actually occasionally catch those. But it is kind of interesting to see how different the market is like now, or how people get out versus then. You know, so but yeah, it looks like they did have a video for You Never Knew. So yeah, which that was one of the singles, so that would make sense.
Gotcha. What do you guys think of? We talked, you know, different form. Dave here was talking about how he loves their flows. What did you think of the production? Do you think the production was cohesive? And then the second thing would be, do you think, what is the production? How would you define the production? Is it boom bap? Is it like a mixture of that and West Coast in the way that the Alcoholics were? And even to some extent, like early MOP albums. I was just listening to same album or same year, First Family for Life, and there's like certain synthesizer samples on there that just kind of like take you to the West Coast. And if you go to MOP's first album, it's got a ton of West Coast. I think that was all. Is it DR Period that did that production. But anyway, what do you think, Blacklist? What do you think of the production overall on the album?
I kind of liked your description of it being kind of like boom bap, but like with a West Coast kind of feel to it. It has like a laid back vibe on a lot of it. So it definitely feels like California when I listen to it. It's kind of like has kind of a warm tone to a lot of it. I think that's the one thing that's always kind of the difference in the feel between West Coast and East Coast. Like East Coast has like usually like a harder, colder vibe to it, where I feel like West Coast has kind of like a warm like swagger to it. I don't know how to like describe it necessarily.
Do you think it's
But
do you think it's more of a chore to listen to East Coast, in a sense of like?
It's less chill. I mean, if you want to get hyped up and like, you know, get in your car and knife through traffic, or you know, you want to get like kind of I don't know, feel like I don't know, like it's kind of like I feel like New York rap is like, or East Coast rap is kind of like fight music. You know what I mean? Like you hear the back where, you know, West Coast kind of is like stuff you want to cruise around in your car when it's warm out, and like, you know, that's kind of the difference of the feel. You know what I mean? You're not like slamming, you know what I mean? Like you would like a Wu-Tang track or something. Like you're just kind of like laid back. Like I don't know how else to describe it exactly, but
I feel like East Coast, it's more like it's almost an acquired taste to the sense that like you know how a rapper flows, and so you're like listening to the way the rapper flows. But with West Coast, it's kind of like you could be introduced to it for the first time and kind of get it. Like I remember the first time I heard Stakes is High with De La Soul in '96. I liked it, but at the same time they were kind of prosaic. So it was kind of like I'd never heard flows like that before. I was used to like rhyme and a rhyme and a rhyme and a rhyme. So in that sense, it was kind of an acquired taste, and I can see why some people would be like, "What is this?" a little bit. So, what do you think, Dave?
Yeah, I'm the same as Chad or Blacklist on the beats. Definitely like there is that West Coast chill, laid back, you know, hanging out in the nice weather all the time type of vibe, and there's a little bit of that. Definitely boom bap in there, because I think a lot of those dudes probably came up on all the, you know, the same stuff, like the East Coast hip hop, just the same, but then they incorporated their surroundings to the New York shit that they were coming up on. So I definitely see the blend. I'd say production throughout was maybe not. There's some tracks that kind of the beats bounce around a little bit. But if you look at the credits, like Domino produced most of it, but a lot of these dudes were Del, A+, Casual, Opio, like they contributed beats to it. So I guess maybe it depends. Like I'll go to like 4 to 5 Phonetics. Like I thought our album was cohesive, but the three of us produced beats in 3 different ways and used different hardware. All sample based, but I think we, you know, had different sampling techniques too. But like the subject matter or our intentions with it were consistent, even if some of the, you know, the backdrops are changing a little bit stylistically. Yeah. So I think it works, but there's definitely some that, you know, different from the others. But like what they're saying and the flows, and that keeps it going.
Yeah, that whole Hyrule album, like, it's just, I feel like it is consistent, and I think that probably is why they have the rating as high as they do.
Yeah.
You know, like most of those ratings, because it doesn't really have a huge weak spot in it. I mean, there might be a beat you're not quite into, but I don't think that necessarily always makes it a bad beat. I do understand what you're saying.
I agree 100%. There's nothing bad. It's just like there's a little different.
Yeah.
I guess in a way.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the time. I don't think there is a bad beat. There's just some that pale in comparison to the more sample-based ones. And I think that's just part of the time where it's like, you know, you're using an MPC over here, but then you're using some Casio keyboard or something. I mean, it comes off like that a little bit. But even then,
Right.
it would still be superior to a lot of the more mainstream production that was popping at the time there. I just the other thing would be chemistry. You think they had great chemistry?
I think so.
I would say
Yeah, I
most
think with
definitely.
Hyro, they've always kind of those cats can like get on tracks and vibe off each other. And
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I'm okay
We
with
all
the
I think they
chemistry
have
on it.
similar. They've got like that West Coast swagger, cadence,
Yeah,
livery. None of them are like, aside from Dell. Dell's a little more like chew the mic up, but it's still like
yeah. He's the most
glass of milk. You know, it's not like or anything like that.
yeah he's the most different of all the others. I think.
The one question I had, and if I was going to be super critical, and this isn't on all songs, but in some songs, it came off as if everything was written in its own place. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
To where like, especially around that time, I was used to like, well, if you and they're a much larger group, obviously, but if you had like a duo, you could tell that the duo sat down in the studio or wherever they were and wrote it together so that the end of a verse was followed by the beginning of the opposite guy's verse, and it all kind of like meshed and flowed. And I noticed
yep,
a couple tracks that didn't happen. Right? It was like a just a creative freestyle, but there wasn't like that cohesion sometimes. And I
yeah,
get it. I mean, there's so many artists, so many MCs. It's like you're gonna sit around for 12 hours and wait for Love to finish his verse so that Casual can then go, and it's just
right. And maybe that's where it was ahead of its time a little bit because now that's how most music gets done. Like people aren't in the same spot at the same time.
right.
So like, yeah, I don't know.
I mean, that's a it's a picky thing to. It's still great music to listen to. I like
Oh,
the
dude,
album.
yeah,
I
super
thought,
dope. It's a classic album.
yeah, yeah.
I
Glad you
think
checked it out.
the dynamic you're talking about though, I think uh, Dave, can you mute your thing? I got a huge echo.
How
I think
about
it's
now?
coming back through still.
You and I are both echoing on my end, but Proseed doesn't.
I say hold on. But yeah, pull your mic down or your volume because your mic's picking up, or just mute your mic temporarily.
Is that
There you
fixing
go.
anything?
Hold on.
Oh, I'm just.
Goodbye, Dave. You're gone.
See you later.
These DJs, you know, they're such
I know,
perfectionists.
right? I just when I hear an echo, I can't like hear.
I got you.
Hold
Anything
on, I'll do it
different?
without the headphones on so I can hear it. But
I'm gonna have to. I'm just
on
using my phone. Like I'm gonna have to set everything up differently next time.
but kind of what we were talking about, like we used to joke and act like they were like the West Coast version of like Wu-Tang. So kind of like that, not totally in the vibe, but like the collection of it. Like if the West Coast had a Wu-Tang, it would be like Hyro. And it's funny you were talking about like you can tell people wrote things in different places or something because like that's kind of the way a Wu-Tang album is too. Like you could have one verse where someone's talking about like how bad violence is, and then the next verse is someone talking about like shooting somebody, or you know what I mean, like fucking somebody up. So
Right.
you definitely get that like with a larger crew of people. And I kind of like that because you get those like different angles within the same song. Like it's not all the same person. Like, you know, every one of those,
Sure.
every MC in that crew has had their own like life experiences or this or that, or maybe a different upbringing, you know what I mean? Different families, everything like that. So I kind of like sometimes like when that happens, especially because if it's a bigger crew, like that's obviously gonna happen, you know. So sometimes it is kind of see like what other people are doing on the same beat, or kind of what it makes them feel like, you know,
Right.
and what they got inspired to write.
Yeah, that's what I like about larger groups or crews. Like you get a variety of sound, a variety of styles, and even like for me, like writing music with other people, like people bring ideas to the table that never pop up in your mind, but once it does, like that topic, subject matter, like sends you in a direction you never would have, like sitting in your own space, thinking to yourself. It kind of, can open your mind, and it probably happens a lot. Or happened a lot on this album, you know what I mean? Any large group album.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that they're compared to Wu Tang as if they're the West Coast Wu Tang, but I actually always confuse them with Freestyle Fellowship. I get kind of like the same vibes. Like it's obviously hip hop influenced by the South Bronx and the founding of hip hop in the East Coast, and then it's all like crazy wordplay. AC alone has like a similar delivery. I'm gonna butcher it with the areas, right? But I think like Bay Area and stuff like that, where they've got like honey on their esophagus when they rap. It's not Edo G or
Yeah,
something like that. The Bulldogs. But
that's
yeah, go ahead.
living legends fit into that too, like West
Yeah,
Coast.
that's it. Living Legends.
Yeah, like
Exactly.
they probably have more doper like large groups in the East Coast too. If you factor in like those crews.
Yep. And then what is it? Project Blowed.
Yep.
Isn't that another extension?
Yeah.
Right.
I think that blends into. I'd have to look at the members, but yeah, they all cross over in some way.
Like the West Coast has rapper, like the amount of rappers out there. It's probably like the amount of aspiring actors that are working as baristas and busboys and waitresses in the East Coast in New York City or something. But
Yeah,
they actually
right.
make a living out there. So, but yeah, there's a bunch of crews out like that. I would say East Coast, it's Wu Tang Clan. Is there another? There's not really another. I can't think of another crew.
I mean, there's other crew. I mean, you have like, you know, I mean, if you're really like going through the underground stuff, I mean, you have like Army of the Pharaohs and,
Okay.
you know, like stuff like that.
That's a good
You know,
point.
there's a lot of different ones. Like I said though, I think that's kind of what, you know, defines uh the East Coast versus like, because you also have like what you know, different Dipset and, you know, different groups for the East Coast. So I think there are bigger, you know, groups on. I think they're just not as necessarily think about them that way in the same way we do on the West Coast. But
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, yeah, but then you're kind of getting into those are like squads, right? So you're talking like
yeah,
Flip Mode Squad, Def Squad, and then later iterations like you said, Dipset. But I don't know that there's like 6 or 7 MCs on an official like group. Or,
yeah,
or
that's
am I
true.
wrong? Like on an album.
I don't know.
You know what I'm
So,
getting at? Like, 'cause,
like I
like,
said, some of those I didn't listen to a ton of because wasn't like in my radar. So you know what I mean. Like that's kind of where I feel like some of that stuff happens where the divergence between like if you were listening to music like in that era too, like without the internet, like if you didn't have a shit ton of money at the same time, like you kind of had to. I guess I could describe it as like your music selection or whatever. Like you kind of had to put your money where you trusted to put it, and you couldn't hear someone on the internet to try it. So you'd go to the music store and you'd pull an album, and you knew who somebody was, or someone related to a crew, or someone that thanked someone in it. So some of the stuff I don't always can speak on because it might have been big at the time, but it wasn't like in my lexicon or my sphere that I owned the album or can really speak enough on it. You know what I mean? So, and I think that was kind of, now we have like streaming. So like, even if you not really into something, you can give anything a try. You can listen to anything. You just got to put a search term in. You can just literally all that stuff's at your fingertips now, and it's insane to think about like back in the era when say this album came out because like you would go to a music store and especially underground artists like you didn't have any radio airplay really. You didn't have any MTV airplay. Most of it was, you heard it from your friends. Like I said, the first time I ever heard this album was like Noma had the vinyl. And I heard it like I think we listened to it in his garage. So there was a lot of groups like that even at the time. I mean, like that's how I got into like Atmosphere and Def Jokes and like the early aughts. Like it wasn't on the internet. I mean, we had internet access, but I would still say it wasn't as that wasn't the distribution model or anything at the time. You really didn't have services like Spotify or even like the early version of Pandora at that time where it would like suggest things to you. So you'd kind of learn about things through crews and labels and interconnected labels. So um,
That's a true point. I remember how important features were. I found out a lot
oh
of
yeah,
different artists just from features on an artist or group that I was already a fan of. And then you go and scoop up their album. And sometimes you're happy and sometimes you're disappointed, but it was still worth a shot. I think
that was the same thing with
I remember buying. I was so unaware of things like when Amazon came out, and I had heard of Teflon on MOP, and I like bought his album, and then I didn't realize that I had bought his vinyl album, not his CD, and I was like, "What is this?" It's my dad's record player, but it's a classic album regardless. But yeah, that was so important. And I think there wasn't there Audio Galaxy. Were you guys familiar with that?
That sounds familiar. I don't know. I can't think of
It
what it
was one of
was.
the like pirated sharing services, but it was a little bit different. It like had like a community about it. I think there might have been like comments under stuff, but that was a way of finding it
Okay.
as well. And then there was early websites like Sandbox Automatic, uh, undergroundhiphop.com, obviously.
Yeah, underground hip hop was big for me.
So is that, and then there was publications from Elemental Magazine, and then there would be live shows and tours, of course, and
There
that's
was man, there was another one I can't think of. It was I don't think it wasn't UGHH. It was oh fuck. I think it was based out of Vegas maybe. Um Damn, I have to look that up. There was another like hip hop one I would go to.
so many have closed down now. I'm trying to remember, and even Sandbox
Is the
Automatic is like a shell of its former self. They don't even. Last time I was on it, there's not much to be purchased or bought, unfortunately.
is the Echo gone for you blacklisted?
I actually figured it out. It was the mainstream was I think a delay ended up coming in through latency, and then that was making it bounce around a little bit. So I just muted
Okay.
the main feed, and it seems to have gone away. So I
All
just
right.
have
Yeah, it's gone. It's gone for me too.
so I think maybe that was feeding back into it. So yeah, I think that's what it was.
Sure.
So it looks like my video is
Blame
frozen in the actual stream, but I can see.
huh?
Right.
All right. What else can we talk about with this album? I mean, I gave you my favorites. I talked about, yeah, I gave a little bit of a critique, but overall, I enjoyed the album. I'm glad I checked it out because I never really have, and I obviously knew about some of the different artists on there. But yeah, I think the album's a gem.
Yeah, it's an extremely worthwhile album, I think. Like I said, at least for me personally, I mean, when we were talking about an album, that's kind of why I pulled that one, because I was thinking of obviously there's always those albums that, you come back to almost like your entire life. Because I mean, let's think of, that album is what, 24 years old now. And it's still one of those things that, you kind of, and I don't know if it's just that when you're that age or if it's just that era of music, but one of those things that just really leaves an impression, and kind of really makes you, becomes like a stepping stone, or a milestone rather. And like you have those certain albums that this directed me in a certain direction, and that's kind of how I feel like that album went for me. Like it kind of pulled me back into that, and then as I was into that, that's kind of when I started finding Blackalicious and different groups like that as well around that era. So I think it was just good for like pulling people back and kind of reestablishing like a direction for underground hip hop, especially in the Bay Area for that time period.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, I was a little, for me, like I don't have that attachment to this album, and the fact that it was impressionable when it came out. And I was like, I started getting into the West Coast music, probably like the West Coast hip hop, probably 2000, 2001 is when I got into like Blacklicious, Living Legends. I mean, I'd already known Abdel, and obviously the Souls of Mischief album, 93 Till Infinity, like I was on that before this, but like I probably in 98 probably didn't even know like Souls of Mischief was in Hieroglyphics, like didn't know that connection was there. That's where the internet helps so much. Like unless if you're seeking that out, or like sometimes you catch that in the liner notes, but if the video popped on TV or something, maybe you put it together. Um, but going back, like I said, I was into the Full Circle album probably before I got into Third Eye Vision, and then I could regard like how dope it was, and then rapping more and more, meeting people who MC like Nadon for one, you realize how important like this album is to a lot of people my age. But like it's just that shit that you miss, or like I didn't happen to pick this up at fucking National Record Mart. Like some albums I would buy albums just based on how they look and realize it's dope. And sometimes you buy something really bad, but like yeah, so that didn't happen for me with this album. But it's dope. It's a classic. It's a classic, and I know it's been impressionable on a lot of people like our age, fellow artists. So I definitely respect it. Dig the flows, styles.